Okay, guys, good evening. You know me, Lester Breuer. Uh, I'm going to talk a little bit about, of course, the interchanges on the Minneapolis Northland Railroad Company. And I'm going to have to go into a little bit of side here and there to go along with it. Uh, the railroad itself, guys, has live interchanges. As you've probably, I've said before, the railroad is based on the Minneapolis Northfield and Southern, loosely based. And so the MNS was a bridge route, which I have copied from them. And as a result, my Minneapolis Northfield, my Minneapolis and Northland is also a bridge route connecting the same interchanges as the prototype. Now, the thing why I call them live interchanges is the cars on my interchanges actually enter and leave the railroad every single operating session. And by that, I mean the cars that end up there, that end up in a session are boxed and taken off, and new cars are unboxed and enter the railroad. So actually, for those who don't have a large area for staging, this is another form of staging, as you'll see as we go along. The beauty of the live interchanges is that all cars that you have built that are in your rolling stock and the in-service cars, they can be used. Now, when I say all cars on the roster, all of my cars that are in service or have been built are right here, as you see here. There's a car card there for each one of them. And also the cards are in the order, like you see you can't see the cards for the GN, it's right up against the front of the file. But then you see the CNW and the Milwaukee in the back there. So the cars are in order by box cars. Next would be the flats and the guns and the hoppers and etc. all the way to the
Hello.
back. Yeah. You also notice that if you look at that CNW area, there are three tabs there. And as a result, those tabs are like the setouts that are on the railroad. So when cars come off, and I'll get into this a little bit. Now, there are, for some reason, my button don't want to work. Here you see the car cards that are in there, and this is I'm with the old system. I started operating about 1974, and being in the accounting industry, had to use which today with the software would be Excel. So I've got everything. I set up everything in Excel way back in the days of Lotus and converted it along the way. So the car cards are here. You see they're 3x5, and this is the day before, and the so-called shipment card. I have about 25 of these made up. And as you see, there are numbers there. That's because I have 14 independent sessions where, in theory, this shipment card would be the call by a customer to the railroad and say, like here you see, I need a car, I need an empty for loading. So that's what you see. So you've got a shipment card. And when you combine that with the car card that we saw earlier, that's what creates the way bills on my railroad. So as you can see right away, any shipment card can match up almost with any car card, of that suits that request. Now we're going to be tracking a couple of these in a little bit here on the, but let's look at the railroads. The first railroad, as on the prototype, was they interchanged, and I do with the Great Northern. In my case, it's in Minneapolis. And also here, you notice this interchange holds 10 cars. And if there's an overflow, and a lot of times also the Sioux Line cars will be on, if you notice the siding next door, the Dawkins siding. So first, no. Anyway, also on the railroad is the CNW interchange, which is about midway on the railroad. The prototype interchanged that in Savage at one time with the CNW. Here, this interchange, if you notice, there's a flip down there in the front of the screen. The interchange holds there 6 cars, and on the second track, a couple cars. So this interchange is capable of 8 cars every session coming on. Then we have on the other end of the railroad, the Milwaukee, and the Milwaukee, my interchange here is broken down into the west and east. This is the west side, which holds 5 cars. You move over to the east side, and which you see the tunnel there, you see the turnout going under the bridge and going off to the tunnel where you see a couple hopper cars. Those hopper cars, that's the east side of the Milwaukee interchange. It holds 6 cars. And again, you have the Bluff siding, which is where the 3 cars are sitting on. And on Bluff siding, if you look near the top, you see there's that Milwaukee. And this siding is not used for passing of trains. It is strictly to use for the transfer traffic between the Milwaukee and the Minneapolis and Northland in Northfield. So, and of course, the operators, if they look at the card boxes, which are on, this is located in Northfield, they obviously know that which cars are there by where the cars are, which town it's in. So, and the last interchange, which the prototype actually was in the town of Randolph, which I've used here, the name off the prototype, it did interchange, and as I do my railroad, with the Chicago Great Western. Currently, that interchange that you see there holds 4 cars. And in time, if I want to add the flip out, as you saw in the Northwestern interchange, it could hold 8 cars. So if you total all of those up, it's approximately anywhere 25 to 30 some cars can come on in a session that get boxed and unboxed. Now, of course, we ask ourselves, why would I want interchanges? Well, it's the car movements for the railroad. In my case, of course, they're on my railroad, they're very important. Now, you have various car movements. If you only have one interchange, you can, of course, do what's called the offline to online, which is simply, as we probably everyone knows here, is an offline shipper simply moving product to a customer online. And in this case, just as an example, that's the Great Northern Interchange we saw earlier. If you look at that butter dish car, which is here a little bit closer, that's a brass butter dish car that a friend who used to operate on the railroad for many, many years put this brass car together and said, I don't like the car you're using, so maybe you could use this butter dish. What it is, and this carries is a milk car, as you see it's labeled. This car has carried bulk, was filled with milk from the creamery in Northfield, went off to the GN interchange where it was emptied at Land O'Lakes in Minneapolis. The car is now empty in the net this morning, or this, let's say, a new session sitting on the GN, and it's going to be moved along to the Northfield Creamery to be filled. Also, as a sidebar, let's say if you can have, of course, that not dealing specifically with an interchange, but online to online shipments. And we're going to just, I'm throwing one of those in along with the interchange movement from offline to online. Here we have a reefer that's also going to go in the same train that that car will go in. Now, the Minneapolis operator doing an op session, excuse me, if you look down at the lower right-hand corner is the GN interchange cards. So he's going to find one for that bulk tank we looked at, that butter dish car, and add that on track 2, which is on the upper row, far left corner is going to be track 2, where that reefer is sitting, coming out of the yard. Here are the 2 cars that the operator would find in the boxes. The upper one being for the tank car and the GN, and the lower one for the reefer that's going to be put into the 2 are going to go into the same train. Now, on my railroad, yard operators must build trains off the what's the consist list, which here, those 2 cars, as you can see, are going to end up in extra west. The guys really call this, nobody wants to call it extra west. They just call it the milk peddler all the time. But you see that it has the tank car there, which is the second row down, the 245. There's an express reefer, which is coming out of the yard. And it's also going to pick up another reefer in Little Chicago. Now, the reefer that's coming out of the yard at this time is completely empty, and it's going to be picking up milk along the way. So that while that train is moving along, we're here at the CNW interchange, and you see above the two tank cars, there's that reefer, 3348. In theory, the Northwestern hasn't got a Milk Express reefer out here, so they're using this one, our car on the branch line, and that's being filled with milk cans along from farmers en route. The Sioux line, as a prototype, had about 10 cars. They actually did this in the area. Now, if you notice in the upper right-hand corner of this photo, down by the Wayne's feed on the kind of the elevator there, you see a milk platform. Here's a better look at that platform. So that car that came out of the yard, reefer 1001, is being stopped at these type platforms. And now those milk cans that are full, that have been delivered by the local farmer, are being loaded on a quick stop into that car. Also, there are flag stops where you see here, like in my Bass Lake Junction, not only are there platforms, the farmers actually, some of them, you would do things like that, load them up in their pickup, and go out there and sit at like this flag stop and wait for that reefer to come along. Train would stop, they load up the milk into that reefer. So that's what's happening on the railroad. So that's what we got for our first type movement we had, where you got bringing a car from offline to online. The other type shipment you can, of course, do with one interchange is an online shipment to an offline, where you have a shipper online moving a product to a customer offline. Now, using those same cars, when they reach Northfield area, the operator there who's operating the yard is going to take those two cars out of the milk peddler, and here he's setting them at the creamery. Now, the 1001, that's the orange reefer in the front. If you notice, it's next to a kind of a chute that where the milk cars are unloaded, go up on the creamery. Those of you who lived in the Minnesota, Wisconsin area and creameries, you're well aware that otherwise trucks also were brought in this way to that platform and unloaded the milk cans. So now the creamery is taking the milk, collecting it from all the farmers, obviously storing in bulk tanks. Now it has to be moved out of the creamery back to, let's say, which I move it now. So that bulk tank, which came in, or the butter dish car, is now filled during the op session in theory, and it will be moved back to the GN interchange where it started. So we're going now from an online customer back to offline. And these two cars will eventually go into Extra West, which the yard operator will, you see there's in the middle, and he will put those two cars, again, that's the afternoon milk peddler that's now carrying at the creamery, by the way, into the reefer. The bulk tank got the, as I call it, got the milk, is now loaded with milk. The other car, reefer 1001, was at that time, while it was sitting there, once the loaded milk cans were unloaded, now empty clean milk cans were loaded, and they will now be distributed on the way back to the farmers that from where they picked up those cans to get back to them. So that's the, if you have only one interchange. Obviously, it's the more interchanges you can, especially at least two, is really neat, because now you can do an offline to offline shipment, which is simply obviously interchange to interchange, or a customer offline shipping to another customer offline. So in this case, it also, what's beautiful, what's the neat part of having the two interchanges is that any car you have in your inventory, that's in service, you can use it. You can justify it now, because it doesn't have to go to a specific customer on your railroad. So even if it's not, the car may not be a good fit for the railroad, you can move it in this manner. And of course, in my case, my railroad, as the prototype is a bridge route, so we move a lot of cars between the interchanges. Now, as an example, as you saw earlier, in front of that reefer, that other train would have the milk peddler or extra west would have picked up. Here it also, on the interchanges, a car with culverts. Now I have no specific industry that would use a culvert load, which I like. So here's where you can use a movement and interchange to interchange. You could possibly use a culvert load, I imagine, to go to a team track if you really want it. Also, I just threw this in because obviously when those two cars now moved from online to offline, here they'd be, the operator, when it got back to the Minneapolis area, cut those two cars and put them both back on the interchange, the GN. So yeah, obviously you've got the interchanges and the movements associated with them. And the other thing that I did not mention is, when you get the interchanges themselves, the online movements, which I used the example that the butter type dish car, or that what I call the bulk tanker car. Also, you had those interchanges when cars leave the railroad, they also, your home road cars, because maybe a customer asked for an empty. So when they left the railroad to an interchange, they have to come back at some point in time. So every op session, I also have, if you remember in that card box I showed, there were the cards that were like set out cards. Those cards go there, and after X number of days or op sessions, they also come back via the interchanges back on. And what that has on a railroad like mine, the yards now are not, same cars are not there all the time. The cars are continually changing also in the yards, because cars are going to customers offline, and those empties are coming back to replace those that left. Now, obviously, all the interchange, if you use, as I do, requires the cars. I remember using boxes. So I like the original box. I've always done it just that way. And obviously, this is not the only way. They could just put them in drawers, etc., whatever. But original boxes or other boxes, as you see here, you see some green ones and the white ones over there. I began operating in about 1974. And so at that time, I just kind of settled on Athearn and Train Miniature. And also, I was buying a lot of cars, a family budget at that time with the young man growing up, and you're on the job. There was always not exactly, so I'd buy lots of cars at flea markets, which I still do, and didn't have boxes for them. So first of all, I thought, well, hey, I can build boxes. So I started making my own. So here's a plan I quickly drew up, and I would start, use this fits, is a Train Miniature type box. And you see here's the boxes I made with trying to copy the way the Train Miniature manufacturer was doing it. But this is pretty tedious. And by the way, obviously, when you fold up that cardboard pattern, those have to be scribed in some manner. Now, I was kind of using a knife blade. Bob, who's out here tonight, him and I discussed this about making a couple boxes, and he said, how about a pizza cutter? And that would be great, because the pizza cutter, I thought Bob had a great idea that the pizza cutter will do that, provide the bend seam and not actually end up, you don't have to worry about cutting the cardboard. But anyway, like I say, I thought I can spend my time better than making boxes working on the railroad. Whoop, I'm sorry. Am I back? There we go. Sorry about that. Anyway, instead of making boxes, so I contacted Athearn, and so I said, can I buy some boxes? And they said, absolutely. So I ordered about 100 of them, and I eventually went through those. So I ordered another 100. And at that point in time, so I'm getting short on those today. And I thought about replacing them. I looked at the wonderful boxes KD has, and but I think those are KD wants. I think it's $3 a box, in my opinion, kind of pricey. Maybe others don't feel so, but I do. But anyway, I was also lucky that some years ago, one of the local hobby shops closed, and the owner, for some reason, had cases of Athearn boxes. that were new, same as I'd ordered, and except most of them were 50-foot. And he said to me, he said, I know you collect the damn boxes and want them for your cars. Do you want to take them off my hands since the shop is closing? Of course, I drove over there and picked them all up. Now, once you use boxes like I do, obviously you have to have an interior that holds that car and keeps it, from being damaged inside. And in my case, I tried the tissue paper, the paper towel. They both end up yellowing, fraying. I gave up on that, went to foam. Foam, all of a sudden, you get it, if you've been in the RPM world, there's, hey, I opened up a box I had stored for quite a while, and it has ruined maybe a paint. It has adhered to the wheels of a car, locomotive. So I said, foam's got to go. So the foam went away. And then I thought bubble wrap was the answer. Well, all of a sudden, same problem. I noticed that when I started using bubble wrap, I would take that car out when it was going on the railroad, and it almost felt like there was a light film on the car. And sure enough, again, in the RPM world, it's come out that, hey, a lot of guys have felt there is a chemical associated with the bubble wrap. So bubble wrap had to go. So finally, I came up with this, which is simply, those boxes and the Athearn box are 1.5 inches deep. Now here you also see that these are nicely labeled. And that's because I went into the local store and picked up a labeler, which I use, but I think this one, I have a brother. But now, and these happen to be all the resin type cars, because I hate the resin boxes that come in. I think they're bulky. They take up way too much storage space, much less than the Athearn box. So anyway, again, here you have the foam on the bottom. And as you see here, the foam goes on the bottom, car goes in. And if that foam really still bothers you, you can put a cardboard strip along underneath the car. Then I make the bow at the top out of, and I cut all these strips, by the way. I have a paper cutter that's probably 20 years old. The old, if you remember our school days, they used to have them in the classroom. I suppose now they'd be too hazardous for the youngsters. But anyway, I cut all the strips on there. So put in the foam, the bottom, upper bend, and then just bend the sides to fit the car. Now, if you, like I say, you could put a piece of cardboard also over the foam if you want, or if you don't want foam in the box at all, you could do this, where you just use the strips, make simple loops, and it holds the car very well. I've carried cars like this to Chicago, the RPM there, and St. Louis, etc., to display models, and never a problem. So I can only say to you, it's a system, again, that I use that may not work, you may not want to do. Of course, if you're using the boxes like I do, you're going to have a storage area for them. And I happen to use cabinets. And this cabinet, I used to also in my day, used to do a lot of woodworking and putzing around. So this is one of the cabinets I built for the railroad. And that cabinet will have inside, you see the shelves on the shelf on the bottom, that contains empty boxes. And those are the cars that are currently from the interchanges that are on the railroad. In the upper part of the cabinet that the doors are closed on, there are 2 shelves dividing it into 3 interchanges, the GN, the CNW, and the Milwaukee. And this cabinet is full of the cars. Now, as a sidebar, you notice on that, there's kind of a plaque that says from Mike to Dad. And then the drawing, my son who passed a couple of years ago because of a heart condition. And I keep those around in his memory, obviously. The top one he did for me when he went off for a couple of weeks to a summer camp when he was very young, as you can tell by the railroad drawing. Later on, one of his hospital stays, he did the other drawing for me. So that's the reason they're on the cabinet. If you happen to come visit, you'd see them there. Then the final, instead of using cabinets, you don't always, when I built the latest, my CNW, the CGW, interchange, which is in Randolph, which I added this past year during the previous year during COVID. I knew I wouldn't have room for storage of cars. So when I built the benchwork, I put that shelf underneath that you see there. And that is the current storage before I can get another cabinet built eventually. And there, so on the right side, you have the cars that are for available to be used on the interchange, and on the left side of the screen are the empty boxes. So guys, that's kind of it, what I have on the interchanges and why you may want to put a couple on your railroad. Okay. Is everybody still there?
Oh yeah, we're still here.
I suppose
That's
you
great,
want me to,
Lester.
now let's see if I can undo this, okay? Get rid of,
There you go.
and hopefully I'm back with you guys.
Yeah, you're
Any
back.
questions that I can answer via interchanges? But you notice I think it's good because if you don't have a lot of room, if you know, these don't take up the room that the typical staging yard does, but yet allows you to do everything that's done in large staging yards. But any questions? Nobody wants to talk.
No, that was great though. That's a great system. I really appreciate how you've done that. And I think it's pretty prototypical too, isn't it?
Everybody I've had here that operates on the railroad, including the railroaders, that I've had that have worked on the railroad, they think this system, which a gentleman and myself developed in the early 70s, like I say, around 74, they think it's extremely prototype because, you build all the trains on the road from cars coming from industry and interchanges, you build them, we run them on the road, and then you break them on down, and that's a session. And then obviously I have to set up. Now these type of interchanges, because I use the boxes, take me more time, setup time, than it may take a lot of other guys. But for me, it works. And the guys that have operated, including all the, like I say, the guys that have worked on the railroads, they have really said it, they think it's very realistic.
Yeah. Well,
And if you were, they said, the closest system, if you wanted to try to buy a commercial system, is probably shipping.
yeah.
Is also similar to this type of system, which we developed. And my system, I know if you look at those boxes, it also didn't just have like a set out slot only. It had 1, 2, and 3 days. That's because I went to quite a few customers that were out in my case, the MN&S, and talked to them. And the average turnaround time on a car was 3 days. They could take anywhere from 1 to 3 days to unload before they'd want to get her out of there. So that's what we put into the system. And my system in that regard has time. That's what I call the time in the system.
I think the way that you prep for the session too is prototypical. You're requesting a car. You're not a type.
That would be, yep, that would be like the yard clerk sitting and the phone rings. And that shipment card is that phone call to the railroad saying, I either need an empty or I need or I got a loaded car that you need to pick up and send off. So that's where that shipment card then would, just like the yard clerk would do, go down his list of what's he got in the yard and match that shipment card up with a card either coming off the interchange, for that type of way bill, or for the home road cars, the home road shipments, way bill is that the shipment card is matched with cars in the yard and sent to the customer during an op session in the various trains.
Lester, this is Wilson. Do you attempt to replicate the car routing rules for empties being routed back to their home road? If you have a bridge route, in theory, if you see a load going one direction, you might see that car coming back as an empty under the car routing rules.
Absolutely. Okay. The other thing, when I said, like, let's say cars coming onto the railroad through the interchanges, my own home road cars come back after about 3 days sitting, theoretically 3 sessions, mine will start coming back, and that's how they funnel the home road. I also, on most cars, once they come from the interchange, are delivered to a customer, and they can sit there 1 to 3 days, as I said, or 1 to 3 op sessions, then they will go back to the road from which they came as an empty.
Okay,
And that's how the interchanges, again, the cars go right back and you get new cars coming on, old cars going off.
Well,
Is that-
Lester, recently I put out something on lumber, and I think the railroad that you model was a railroad that they often shipped those rolling lumber cars to and left them there.
Yeah, we had on the MNS on their Highline, as they called it, which came out of Auto Club Yard and went up and through Richfield. Yes, there's a lot of lumber loads. I have them through couple lumber yards and mill work on the railroad, but they primarily, they had some on the line in some of the areas along, I would say in St. Louis Park. They also had, I lived on the end of the MNS on their Highline, which there was Thompson Lumber. And so, yes, a lot of lumber loads were moved on the MNS.
Now, I speak more of they were moved there and then they stayed there until somebody on another railroad, maybe in New York, bought it. In other words, they didn't go to anything on the railroad and on your railroad.
I do not really do that type of thing. I strictly move the lumber to a customer or it might go to a team track, which also can be a customer and unloaded there. But all of mine are loads that come in and are unloaded to a customer. Okay,
Yeah, I got one car that just runs around all the time, never finds a home. It's got a permanent card that says rolling lumber.
okay. Well, on the interchanges, I have a couple cars that, you notice that milk tank, that butter dish runs every session, obviously. And I have a couple other cars that are like that. I have a hopper where ashes at the power plant, ash load car comes off and the empty goes. And so, and an LCL stock car operation, which also is in theory, I don't know of any of you, but I've read it was the SP. And again, there was some of this done in the Midwest area where like LCL traffic, there were stock cars that were run the same way on locals extras because of farmers could not ship, didn't have a herd to ship, but they needed money. They wanted to ship 1 or 2 cows via the railroad. And so they would do it. So literally there was stock movement via the LCL as we think of only packages, but it was also done with livestock.
Lester, how many cars at one time are on the layout, would you estimate?
I don't know. I'm, I can tell you that about anywhere, as I said, 25 to 30 some cars are going on.
Yeah.
The yards, I don't know, and that customer, well, you saw that cabinet with the bottom empty there.
Mhm.
Those cars were all on the railroad,
Okay.
plus what's in the yards. Probably 150 cars
All right.
in that range. I'm going to say 100 to 20, let's say, I'm going to say 120 to 150 cars.
Okay. Yeah, just curious.
So hopefully this helps or hinders. I hope not.
Yeah, no, that's great. It's really, really informative. Are there any other questions? Next week, Ron is going to do a clinic for us on the oil jobbers. So we'll look forward to that. And then we have an open week. I may do something, an update on what I'm doing, unless somebody else volunteers. And then Doug Harding is going to do on the following Thursday after that, 3 weeks from now, I guess it is. Doug is going to do a session on lumber, since we've been talking about that on the email. So anybody else wants to step up, we're open for it and we encourage it. It's a friendly group, so it's a good way to improve your presentation skills if you are interested in doing that. And so just get a hold of me or Ron and let us know you're interested, and we'll find a date for you. This 5:30 time is going to work for me through December at least. And so we'll stick with 5:30 Central, 6:30 Eastern, and unless there's any objection or a suggestion for another day or something like that, but it seems to work. So thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you next week.
Have a good week.
Thank you
And
much.
thank you, Lester. Great job.
Oh,
Appreciate
hey, thank you for having me, guys.
it.
Thank you for putting up with me. You guys have a good one.
All
Stay
right,
safe.
bye-bye.